Now, let me ask you a quick question. It might seem a random question, but do you like spicy food? I love it. I love jalapenos on burgers, on pizza. I love spicy curries. I love a vindaloo. Just I love spicy food. I don't know what it is, even when it's so spicy that my stomach's like rebelling against me when I've eaten it. I just really like spicy food. I like things hot. But in this story today, things got so hot that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego might have thought they were too hot to handle. Let me get into this story. This is from Daniel chapter 3. If you want to follow, please do. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Let's go. King Nebuchadnezzar, that's the ruler of the Babylonian Empire, he made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 90 feet wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And then he sent messages to all of the officials. So all of these officials, they came and they stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, hear the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow down to the ground and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshipped the gold statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, when it stresses this, when it says all the people of every race, nation, and language, what it's saying is that no matter what god anyone followed, they bowed down and worshipped this statue. A lot of scholars have theorized that this was a statue of Nebuchadnezzar himself, that Nebuchadnezzar has set up this statue to order people to worship him. Now, I think sometimes we infer that from the text, but whatever it was, the command was clear. When you hear the worship band start playing, you bow to that statue. No matter what other god you say you serve, you bow. You submit yourself to the God that King Nebuchadnezzar tells you to. Now, as we know from last week, as you may know about the book of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were Jews. They'd been taken as teenagers from Judah, from Jerusalem, which King Nebuchadnezzar had decimated. They'd been kidnapped and forced into service of the Babylonian Empire. And the reason that God had allowed this to happen was that Israel was unfaithful to him. They served other gods. They bowed before other gods. And Yahweh, the God of Israel, he said, "I have had enough. I've had enough. This continues no longer. You're not listening. You pay no attention. So I'm going to take away all of your security. You think you're secure in your fortress city of Jerusalem? I will allow someone to knock it down. You think because you're my chosen people, I'm not going to discipline you? No, you are going to receive discipline, and I'm going to do it at the hand of this other empire who worship other gods than me." God allowed this to happen. And so you can imagine that in the minds of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the command to worship this other God is instantly something that their hearts rebel against. The whole reason they're there is that they were not obedient to worshipping Yahweh and Yahweh alone. Yahweh was the name that God told Moses and the Israelites to call him by. It means, I am who I am. I'm me. I'm God. That's what Yahweh means. So when this command comes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have to decide, are we going to obey the culture around us and bow to this statue, or are we going to go the way of God? Let's find out. But some of the astrologers of the kingdom went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king! You issued a decree that all people must bow down and worship the golden statue when they hear the band. And that decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you've put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up." It says that Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage, and he had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego dragged before him, and he questioned them, and he said, "We are going to play that music, the worship band is going to play, and when it does, if I don't see you bow before my statue, you will be thrown into that furnace. You will pay the price for refusal and rebellion to worship my gods. You will pay." He said these words, "If you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" And when kings and rulers say that kind of thing, I think God takes it as a personal challenge. Let's see how he responds. Because of course, Shadrach and Abednego refuse. And they state their faith in God. In verse 17 they say, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God who we serve is able to rescue us from your power, your majesty." This is bold. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Now it says Nebuchadnezzar flew into another rage. He was enraged, and he ordered that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. And then he got his strongest men, the most powerful of his soldiers, to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and hurl them into the furnace. And so they tie them up, they throw them into the furnace fully dressed. And it says that because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the men in. This is a brutal act from Nebuchadnezzar. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement, and he exclaimed to his advisors, Didn't we tie up 3 men? 3, and throw them into the fire?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Well, look," shouts Nebuchadnezzar, "I can see 4 men, unbound, just walking around in the fire. And the fourth looks like a god, or the son of a god." He says it looks like there is some kind of supernatural being in there with them. Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God." He's already changed his tune. "Come out, come here." As soon as Nebuchadnezzar sees that God has saved them, he begins to honor Yahweh. I think that's amazing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. And then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around and saw the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. That's bonkers, right? I mean, that's bonkers. It's like God erected a force field around them, so no aspect of the fire could touch them. God messed with the laws of physics to save these guys. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god but their own. So I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb. Their houses will be turned into rubble, for there is no other God who can rescue like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. What a bonkers story. I love the way that God flips everything on its head. Not only does he save them, but in saving them, the consequence of them being saved, are that the king pronounces this edict that no one is to attack or persecute or slander the God of the Jews in any way. They get freedom to worship. They are freely allowed to worship God, and no one is allowed to stop them. And it's all because of their faithfulness. You see, God didn't step in until they stepped out. They had to step out and risk death, risk danger, risk the persecution falling on them before God stepped in. And I wonder if sometimes as Christians, we don't see God step in because we are not willing to step out. How often do you step out and risk your reputation, risk your safety, risk your job, risk your relationships for Jesus, for living the way of God? How often do you step out to allow God to step in? It never would have happened in their lives. God never would have stepped in if they hadn't stepped out. And so this is the challenge for us today. I mean, I wonder where you might be worried and about the persecution you could face. I wonder what enemies might be coming against you. I wonder what challenges you might be facing. But remember, the lesson from this story today is that God didn't step in until Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out. What does stepping out look like? It's looking for the opportunities to bless people, to love people, to share Jesus with people in any way we can. What is stepping out? Stepping out is being willing to say, I am a follower of Jesus. Bringing justice into situations where there is injustice, with gentleness and humility, but trying to bring that justice. And when we step out, so often God steps in. I've told the story before about a time when I've been on a train, and I was sitting next to a Muslim man. I assume he was a Muslim man. I don't know for certain, but he was just sitting there, and a group of really racist, aggressive guys just started having a go at him and telling him to, get off back to his country, and calling him a terrorist and all of these things. And it would have been quite easy for me to have switched seats, to have moved away, to have gone somewhere else in the carriage, or just sit, read my book and let it happen. But I felt this terrifying nudge from God. And I believe maybe God kind of just put these words into my mouth, and I just turned and I said, in the name of Jesus, leave my friend alone. And I didn't know him. I'd never met him before. But I believe that in that moment, that man needed a friend who knew Jesus. And so I simply said, in the name of Jesus, you leave my friend alone. And the most incredible thing happened in that moment. I don't know quite how, I don't know what he did, but the whole situation changed. It was like there was this incredible peace in the carriage. And people were looking around, and people looking at the situation, not knowing what was going to happen next. But these three guys, they turned around and they just walked out and went into the next compartment. Now, I don't know what God did with them in that moment. I don't know what they saw, what they heard, but I do know that all I did was stepped out, literally just stepped out of my seat, and God stepped in. How's God calling you to step out this week so that He can step in? The man who they've been attacking turned to me and said, "Thank you so much. Thank you." He just kept saying, "Thank you so much." And I said, "It's no problem." And I'd like to tell you that I sat with him and talked about Jesus, but the next stop arrived and I had to go. But I would love to believe that in some way, because I stepped out and he stepped in, that man understands Jesus in a new light and maybe has chosen to follow him. I pray that this week you will have the courage, the boldness, and the wisdom to know when to step out. And I know and have faith that when you need him, Jesus will step in. God bless you. The Lord be with you, and I'll see you soon.